All right, good afternoon, everybody. Again, this is Lizzie Kosei. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've also got Taylor Dunn on the line, and she's going to be helping me move the slides along. Unfortunately, my internet went out last night in the storm, and I have a hot spot, but it's a little temperamental at best. So Taylor's going to be doing the slides for me, and hopefully I won't cut out during this presentation. I do want to do a quick check. I was scanning the list of participants and I was wondering if anyone from Assumption is here or St. Martin. I think those are the only ones I'm missing. If I'm missing you, please type in the chat box and let me know that you're here if you are a representative from Assumption or St. Martin. And finally, right before we begin, I do want to remind you that it would be most helpful if you have your application open as we go through this process, so that you can make notes, you can take a look at what your original answer was and think about ways to improve them. Okay, Taylor, we can move along. Okay, great. So here's what we're going to do today. We are going to go section by section, looking specifically at the overall section as a whole and also diving into some specific questions and give you some particular probing questions that could help you answer it a little bit more detail or go in the direction the department was looking for. And finally, we'll end with a timeline. All right, so we're diving in on the blueprint section. First, okay, so as you know, the majority of you participated in the Get Ready cohort, and so a lot of you were very familiar with Blueprint. And those who didn't participate in Get Ready cohort had already created their blueprints independently of the Get Ready cohort. So everybody already had one, which was great. We just wanted to hear a little bit more about the process itself, how we wanted you to describe that process and reflect on it. How could you improve that process in the future? So the really strong responses in this section addressed how data was, and will be used to develop the blueprint. We really want to make sure you tap into that data, and we wanted to have a better understanding of how you used it the first time you developed your blueprint. What data did you look at? What was most important as you developed goals? That sort of thing. I think that would be really important, and that would help us have a better understanding for how you came to some of these decisions. We also thought strong responses considered how a diverse set of stakeholders were engaged in this process. Maybe they weren't the first time, but we wanted them to consider in the future how they could be engaged to develop and refine the blueprint. We also wanted you to reflect how you could have improved this process. So there was a second part of question number 3, where we asked you, what could you do to improve the process, or what would you do differently, rather, I believe is what we said. And some people answered it and addressed it, and not everybody did. So we just want to make sure that you do address this portion of the question. We think that it's really just important to be reflective and to think about all the good things you did and all the great steps you took, but there's always room for improvement, and we wanted you to address that as well. And finally, we wanted to see, do you have a clear plan for revising the blueprint moving forward? Are you going to use clearly defined checkpoints? How are you monitoring your progress towards goals and adjusting as you make that progress, etc.? So Taylor, why don't we move on to the next slide? Okay, so we're diving straight into question 3, because questions 1 and 2 were simply asking you to attach your blueprint and to attach an external blueprint if you had one. So looking at question 3, it asked, like I said before, it asked you to describe the process used to develop the blueprint, who did you engage, and what would you do differently? And we really did want you to go in depth on the process. We kind of did want you to get in the weeds of things. We wanted to hear, how did you conduct your analysis of current state? Did you look at data, and what data did you look at? How did you develop your mission and vision statement? Was it a collaborative process with other people, other program partners? Was it did you do a certain activity? Maybe you did the headlines from the future activity that was presented in the Get Ready cohort. We really do kind of want to hear those details of how this blueprint came to be in your community. We also wanted to see, how did you develop goals? In general, what the overall process was like. Lastly, we do want to know who was involved, who was brought to the table. And finally, I guess I should say, what would you do differently? How could this process be improved upon? We did get some feedback that they felt rushed. Some people felt like they didn't have sufficient time to meet with program partners or to iterate or to brainstorm some more. And so if that is the case, we want you to be honest here and let us know how that could be improved upon, what you would do to make this a better process. And the good news is this blueprint isn't going away anytime soon. So if maybe you didn't get it right the first time, when you address it in the future, you could potentially engage some of those strategies you didn't before to really strengthen it to the best of its ability. All right, next slide. All right, question 4. How do you plan to update or make changes to your blueprint, and who else will you consult in the future? So the department is looking for you to establish a clear plan for revising your blueprint, and that might look differently in different networks. A lot of people did mention that they believed this was a living document. They believed they should revisit it, but we would recommend that you use some sort of clearly defined checkpoint. Maybe you look at it quarterly, maybe you look at it annually or semi-annually. It's good to kind of put a marker in stone that says, all right, we've reviewed it this many, we always review it this many times a year. This is when we check for progress. This is when we look back at the goals, etc. So like I just said, we want to make sure you are monitoring toward your goals and adjusting as your network makes progress. So maybe one of your goals was about increasing seats. And in the first semester of next year, maybe you did that. Maybe you did increase your seat count. So when you've made that progress, how will that affect your blueprint? How will you adjust it after you've made that progress? And finally, who was not consulted the first time that needs to give input or feel invested in this blueprint? So it's possible that as you begin Ready Start Network work and engaging new people and new stakeholders and coalition members, you might want to bring this in front of them. We might want to help them feel like they have a horse in the race, and really get them involved in this process if you feel like that's most appropriate. I do know some of our current Ready Start networks really wanted to engage community members so that they really had buy-in from those community members, and the community members felt like they really contributed and really had kind of a horse in the race, like I said. So these are all just things to think about. We just want to make sure that you're kind of intentional as you make plans to your blueprint, and you kind of have a pretty clear established plan for revisiting it. Okay, next slide. All right, the question 5 was, how do you plan to use your blueprint as a tool to achieve your community network's goals? And I feel like the majority of you did a great job answering this question in one vein or another. And we just wanted you to kind of think big picture for any of the following activities. What role could your blueprint play? And those activities are decision making, recruiting coalition members, advocacy, achieving your goals, moving early childhood forward in your network. Keep in mind that your blueprint could be consolidated into a shorter, more visually appealing version that could be used when, like I said, when you're recruiting coalition members, as a communication tool, I do think some of you indicated that you were anticipating kind of a high level version of this blueprint that was visually appealing, that caught your eye, that you could use with potential stakeholders and communicating how to get your message across. So it's possible it could be used in that way as well. And how will you utilize your blueprint to keep goals at the forefront of your work? Are you going to post your goals and review them before meetings? What can we do to make sure this blueprint is not just a document you created to check a box, but something that you can really put to the best of its, to use it the best that you can? Okay, I think that's the last question in the blueprint section. Taylor, yeah, okay. So what we're going to attempt now, Taylor's going to try to put us in breakout sessions. So what this means is we will get into smaller groups for just a few minutes to discuss the feedback that you've heard so far, and for you to think about what improvements you could make in your own application. But we're going to be doing this in a smaller group. So I'm not sure, Taylor, how big these groups are or how many people will be per group, but we encourage you to share, and we want to use this as an opportunity. Maybe with a smaller group, you might be more comfortable talking in front of them.
We're gonna, Lizzie, I'm about to send us into these rooms, so hopefully this works. And I think we're gonna break into rooms of about 3 to 4 for participants per room. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that does sound good. Thank you.
Okay.
You were a little faint. I'm not sure if it was just my phone or from my end, but if you didn't hear her, I think she said there would just be 3 or 4 per room. So it should say the host is inviting you to join a breakout room, and you would click join. And we'll meet back up in just a few minutes. Okay, let's move on to the next coalition section. All right, so in the coalition section, I would say overall, most of you guys really gave very thoughtful answers in terms of who could potentially be recruited to join your larger coalition. There were really great, very diverse lists. And I feel like a lot of you were extremely creative in who you think might be able to help you move along early childhood work in your community. The biggest feedback I have for this section would be for you to think about varied and ongoing engagement opportunities. So a lot of you thought about maybe having a big kickoff meeting, or some of you thought about having individual meetings with these potential coalitions members. Some of you thought about ongoing engagement. Maybe you would add them to your newsletter. Maybe you would invite them to meetings. And I feel like what we would like you to do is to think of all of those various different things. We'd like you to consider a varied and ongoing engagement strategy, including how you will continue to engage these folks after that initial recruitment. I also think that it would be great if everybody describes specific ways the coalition can help your Ready Start Network move forward, considering these major points: advocacy, strategy, fundraising opportunities, leveraging opportunities. And leveraging is kind of a buzzword, but basically what I mean there is, if maybe you have a relationship with one of these stakeholders, they could potentially get you in touch with someone else who is influential in your community or who might be helpful to your cause. Also consider that your coalition can help you accomplish goals and support your blueprint. Next slide. So for number 2, that was where we asked you to list those potential stakeholders and organizations that you would engage. And like I said before, I think this was really an excellent job for almost everybody's application. Very diverse list of folks. Really excited about everybody you're hoping to engage in the future. The only bit of feedback I really have is that if you're listing individual names, be sure you kind of indicate what kind of organization they represent or what category they fall into. So are they from the nonprofit world? Are they from philanthropy? We just don't know when you just list an individual name, whether or not, what kind of organization they're from. So just a little more detail there would be helpful. Next slide. Okay, for question number 3, how do you plan to engage these potential stakeholders and organizations to participate in your Ready Start Coalition? So we really want you to consider all of the following components when you're answering this question. Think about the initial approach. How will you reach out to them? Can you leverage current partnerships to make new ones, which is kind of what I alluded to earlier. Maybe someone you already have a connection with can introduce you to someone else they know. And also, how can you meet stakeholders where they are? Some of these folks might not be able to attend your larger meeting, but maybe you can have a one-on-one meeting with them or meet in a different setting. We want to meet them where they are if that is the case. Also, maybe you can consider having some sort of initial engagement or kickoff event. I heard some very creative answers for what this might look like, and I was really excited, and I was honestly hoping that I could attend some of these. They sounded like such great events that you had in mind. So if you didn't have this in your plan, I think that would be a great thing to consider. And maybe when we have our breakout session at the end of the coalition section, we can discuss some of those initial engagement events that we were thinking about having. I also think it would be great if you could consider how you're going to engage these folks in the long run. So are you going to still communicate with them through newsletters? Are you going to invite them to meetings? What does that look like? Because it's one thing to get them on board and to get them excited about early childhood, but we want them excited in a year's time as well. And we want to think about how we can continue to keep them engaged in your work. And finally, it's important to educate some of these stakeholders about early childhood and get their buy-in. We really, a lot of them probably are not super familiar with the benefits of early childhood, or they might not be familiar with some of the terms that we use. They don't know what class data means necessarily. So some of the first Ready Start networks have done tours of early childhood facilities. They visited pre-K classrooms, they visited childcare facilities, which I think really gives a strong picture of what positive teacher-child interactions look like and kind of gives a new spin on it. Some of these folks might not have ever been in a good pre-K room. Some of them might have kids that are grown and haven't been in pre-K for a long time. So that could be something you might want to consider. Other Ready Start networks have done data walks. So they presented their data in a really easy to understand way and made it very engaging and a fun process. So you could post data around a room and have them walk around the room to learn about different points of early childhood that are important. So basically, we just want to make sure you emphasize to these new folks how important early childhood is. And in this answer for your application, consider how to do that. Okay, next slide. Oh, I feel like there was one more. Maybe not. Okay, so that's it, my bad. So we are going to break out again, thanks to Taylor's Zoom wizarding abilities. And so when we break out this time, I'm going to ask that you guys specifically discuss some of the ideas you had for engaging your coalition. Maybe you had a good idea for a kickoff meeting. Maybe you had a good idea for how to engage with one another with these rooms. And then when we come back, I'd like a couple people to share with the larger group, either your own idea or something that you heard a good idea from one of the other applicants. So let's break out.
Need some ideas for a kickoff. We didn't include that in ours. Did y'all plan a kickoff in yours?
No, we did not. We just said how we would take our
Arita, I'm so sorry. I realized I had you on mute, so I didn't hear what you just said. Can you say that again?
Okay, I was just saying I was gonna wait to see what Monica, since I kind of took the lead on that last time, but I know she has to type. I think she said she tried to call in, but it wouldn't work. I'm just reading the comments that you left on ours. I see some things, and I listened to some of the ideas that some of the others may have suggested, like the kickoff, which is something I did not think of, but I don't know what Caldwell had for theirs, but I would certainly like to hear. I'm open for any options.
Yeah.
Suggestions.
Yeah. So I heard a couple of, when reviewing these applications, I can just tell you from my perspective.
Okay.
Heard about some really good kickoff events, like a luncheon of some sorts, or early childhood. Someone even mentioned that they might have some pre-K for kids attending and kind of